Chapter 1. The Death at Davenheim Mews. It was a brisk October morning in London when Hercule Poirot received a most unexpected visitor at his flat on Whitehaven Mansions. The fog, thick and persistent, clung to the city like a heavy coat, blurring lamplight and muffling the clatter of hooves and wheels in the street below. Inside, however, all was in order. Poirot sat at his breakfast table, a soft boiled egg precisely timed to 3.5 minutes before him, the shell already cracked just so. His silver moustaches were immaculately waxed, and a single orchid bloomed proudly from the vase near the window. Miss Lemon, his fastidious secretary, appeared at the door. "There is a woman to see you, Monsieur Poirot," she said, in her matter-of-fact tone. "She insists it is urgent." Poirot dabbed the corner of his mouth and folded his napkin. "Let us permit her to disturb the peace then, Miss Lemon. Show her in." The woman who entered was tall and elegant, though visibly shaken. Her gloved hands trembled as she unpinned her hat. Her tailored coat spoke of taste and money, yet her eyes darted like a frightened bird's. "I am Mrs. Beatrice Caldwell," she began. "My husband, Edgar Caldwell, was found dead this morning in his study. The police say it was suicide, but I know—" Her voice cracked, and she clutched her handbag tightly. "I know it was not." Poirot rose and gestured towards the armchair opposite. "Sit, madame. Calm yourself. We shall approach this with the method, yes? You believe your husband has been murdered. Why?" Beatrice inhaled shakily. Edgar was not a man to take his own life. He was methodical, punctual, grounded in routine. He was a clockmaker, Monsieur Poirot. Time was his obsession. "A man of precision," Poirot murmured. "Très intéressant." The police found a note, typewritten, unsigned. It simply read, "I can no longer endure it." But Edgar detested machines, never typed a word in his life. He always wrote in cursive with his fountain pen. And there was something else. His prized chronometer, the one he kept beside his desk, was missing. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A man obsessed with time, dead beside an absence of time. Mon Dieu. Tell me more. "He had no enemies that I know of," Beatrice continued. "Our home is in Davenheim Mews, Kensington. He kept to himself mostly. He had his apprentices, of course, and 1 or 2 patrons who commissioned bespoke pieces. There was also an argument last week with a man named Julian Markham." "And who is this Monsieur Markham?" "An eccentric antiques dealer. He brought in a 17th century Dutch clock Edgar was repairing. They quarrelled loudly. Markham accused Edgar of something. I didn't hear the full exchange." Poirot's fingertips came together thoughtfully. "Madame, I shall come to Davenheim Mews. I shall see the scene, speak to the people, and I shall use the little grey cells to uncover the truth of your husband's death." The next hour found Poirot in a closed cab with Inspector Jameson of Scotland Yard, who had been summoned on Beatrice's insistence. "We're still treating it as suicide," Jameson said brusquely. "The note's convincing. There was no sign of forced entry, no struggle, and the room was locked from the inside. Classic locked room case." Poirot tilted his head. "That, my dear Inspector, is precisely why I do not trust appearances." Davenheim Mews was a quiet crescent off Kensington High Street. The Caldwell residence, number 4, was a 2-story Georgian building with ivy crawling up its facade. Beatrice met them at the door, composed now, but her eyes still red-rimmed. "The study is upstairs," she said softly. "The constable has kept it sealed." Poirot ascended the narrow staircase, noting each creak in the wood beneath his patent leather shoes. The study door bore a simple brass plaque, "Mr. Edgar Caldwell, horologist." Inside, the room was a shrine to mechanical precision, Clocks of every era line the walls, mantel clocks, long case clocks, carriage clocks, all silent, all stopped at different times. The air smelled of oil and varnish. On the desk, papers lay neatly stacked. A typewriter sat askew to the side, with the note still in the carriage. Beside the overturned chair, a revolver. Blood had dried on the wool carpet. Poirot's gaze swept the space, missing nothing. He bent to examine the typewriter, then walked to the empty spot near the window where the missing chronometer once stood. There is no broken glass. The window is latched from within. Yet the prized clock, gone. He straightened. This room speaks to me, Inspector, and it tells me of a man who valued order. And yet, see here. He pointed to a tiny indentation in the wood beside the clock's absence. Scrape marks. Recent? Someone removed the clock with a tool. Inspector Jameson frowned. Still doesn't explain how they got in or out. Poirot did not answer. Instead, he examined the typewriter again. No fingerprints? But of course not. Gloves would be worn. Yet the ribbon is used only for this one letter, no other documents. He crouched by the body's location. The gun was held in the right hand, yes? But the bullet wound is angled leftward, slightly upward. Curious. They went back downstairs. Beatrice was waiting in the parlour, her hands clasped. Was there anyone else in the house last night, madam? Poirot asked. Only Harlan, the apprentice. He rents a room above the workshop out back. Did you hear anything unusual? I heard the chime of one of the clocks, perhaps 11, maybe midnight, but I did not rise. Poirot nodded. I should like to speak to young Harlan. The apprentice was summoned. Harlan Bishop, a lanky youth of perhaps 20, had ink-stained fingers and a wary expression. He looked uncomfortable under Poirot's gaze. I was asleep last night, sir. Heard nothing. This morning, I found him gone. You have worked here long? 6 months. Mr. Caldwell was particular, demanding, but fair. Did you know Julian Markham? Harlan's brow furrowed. Yes, bit of a blowhard. He was angry last week. Claimed Mr. Caldwell had swapped a mechanism in his antique. Said the original was priceless. Poirot's moustache twitched. Did he threaten your employer? Not exactly, but he left furious. Poirot rose. Merci, Harlan. That will be all. As the door closed, Inspector Jameson shook his head. So, what do you make of it, Poirot? Poirot smiled faintly. I make of it a puzzle, mon ami, and puzzles, like clocks, demand precision. Let us visit this Julian Markham. He glanced once more at the clocks upon the wall. One, a chipped porcelain carriage clock, had a faint smear of blood on its face, almost invisible against the gilded numerals. Even in silence, Poirot murmured, the clocks still speak. Chapter 2. The Antiques Dealer. The air was damp and tinged with the scent of aged wood and mildew as Poirot and Inspector Jameson arrived at Julian Markham's shop, Kronos and Curios, nestled at the corner of Belgrave Street in Chelsea. The bell above the door tinkled as they stepped inside, and the rich ticking of clocks from every surface greeted them like a mechanical symphony. Impressive collection, Jameson muttered, glancing at a glass case of enamelled French timepieces. Poirot said nothing. He was too busy observing. The dust was disturbed in certain areas, the clocks not all ticking, and some clearly displayed merely for show. There was a disorder behind the order, a haphazard attempt at elegance. Behind the counter stood a man in his late 50s, with a hawkish nose, a tightly wound scarf despite the warmth, and eyes that gleamed like polished obsidian. "I am Julian Markham," he said crisply. "And unless you're here to purchase, I'd thank you to make your business brief." Poirot stepped forward. "Monsieur Markham, I am Hercule Poirot." This is Inspector Jameson. We have come to speak to you regarding Edgar Caldwell. The name landed like a dropped weight. Markham's jaw tightened. What of him? He's dead, said Poirot gently. Shot. The police suspect suicide. His widow believes otherwise. Markham blinked slowly. Dead? Well, I can't say I'm surprised. He was the type to unravel at the edges. You had a disagreement last week, Jameson said, stepping in. Markham's hands moved to straighten a small ormolu clock. Disagreement is putting it mildly. He ruined a rare Dutch timepiece I entrusted to him, a De Haan regulator, early 1600s, worth several £1,000s, priceless truly. And how exactly did he ruin it? Poirot asked. Markham gave a bitter laugh. He replaced the escapement with a modern mechanism, some clumsy British-made thing. He said the original was beyond repair, but I suspect he sold it off. Thieves in waistcoats are still thieves. Poirot's brow lifted. That is a serious accusation, monsieur. It's a serious loss. Did you threaten him? Markham gave a hard smile. I may have raised my voice. That's not a crime, is it? Jameson narrowed his eyes. Where were you last night between 10 and midnight? Markham didn't blink. Here, in the shop. I live above it. I was reading until I fell asleep, alone, before you ask. Poirot nodded politely. May we see the clock in question, the De Haan? Markham hesitated, then turned and opened a cabinet. From within he pulled a tall, slender clock in an ebony case. It was beautiful, with brass filigree around the face and finely painted numerals. Yet to Poirot's eye it looked oddly off. It no longer functions, Markham said tersely. Not after Caldwell's meddling. Poirot bent to inspect it. The back panel was unscrewed, and within, nestled in sawdust, was a modern escapement mechanism, a poor fit indeed. Poirot stood up slowly. It seems strange to me, monsieur, that a man such as Caldwell, so meticulous, would make such an inelegant substitution. Did you inform him of your suspicions? I did. He denied it. He swore on his reputation. But he was lying. I saw it in his eyes. And yet, Poirot mused, he was dead within a week. Markham's gaze darkened. Don't look at me, Monsieur Poirot. I have no love for Edgar Caldwell, but I am not a murderer. I collect time, not end it. Poirot smiled slightly. Nevertheless, you are very much a man concerned with value. The clock's mechanism, is it recoverable? Markham shook his head. Gone, I assume. Stolen or sold. Poirot tilted his head. And if someone were to come into possession of such a piece, would it be easily identified? Markham laughed humorlessly. Certainly, a De Haan escapement is as rare as a unicorn, expertly engraved with the initials HD and the maker's fleur-de-lis symbol. Anyone in horological circles would recognize it. Merci, monsieur, Poirot said. You have been most helpful. As they exited into the misty street once more, Jameson muttered, He's hiding something. You can tell. Perhaps, Poirot said thoughtfully, but he is also proud. It would wound his ego more to be caught in a lie than a crime. Let us not rush, mon ami. The truth, it is patient. They returned to Whitehaven Mansions that afternoon, where Miss Lemon had left a pot of tea and a note on Poirot's writing desk. Poirot sipped slowly and read aloud. Julian Markham filed a legal complaint against Caldwell 2 months ago, dropped without explanation. And more intriguingly, Caldwell's will was amended 3 weeks ago to include a previously unnamed beneficiary. One, Mr. Harlan Bishop Jameson, sat bolt upright. The apprentice? Just so. But that boy looked green as grass. Poirot set down his cup. And yet perhaps it is the greenest fruit that hides the worm. Come, let us visit this Harlan again, but not as policemen. as inquirers. I wished to observe, not accuse. That evening they returned to Davenheim Mews. The workshop, dimly lit by amber lanterns, smelled of brass shavings and clock oil. Harlan was bent over a disassembled mantel clock, tools laid neatly on a velvet tray. "Working late, Monsieur Bishop?" Poirot asked with mild cheerfulness. The boy startled but composed himself. "Yes, sir. Deadlines." Poirot examined the tray. "You are orderly, I see. Do you enjoy the precision?" "I do. There's something comforting in it." "Everything has its place." Poirot smiled. "And yet, when the master dies, does the apprentice inherit the house?" Harlan paled. I didn't know about that. Mrs. Caldwell never said." "Mais oui," Poirot said softly. "That is often how secrets begin, with silence. Tell me, Harlan, did Mr. Caldwell ever confide in you about the Markham affair?" Harlan hesitated. "He told me he hadn't touched the Dehaans' parts. He said it came to him that way, that someone was trying to discredit him. He seemed frightened." "Frightened men often protect things," Poirot said, "or hide them. Where, I wonder, would a man obsessed with time hide a thing he valued more than his own name?" Poirot looked up at the rows of clocks lining the shelves. "Tick-tock, young man. Perhaps one of these holds more than time." As they left, Poirot whispered, "The Dehaan mechanism is not gone, Jameson. It is very close indeed." Chapter 3. The Hidden Timekeeper. The next morning, Hercule Poirot returned alone to number 4, Davenheim Mews. He had risen early, his routine never failing him. The moustaches groomed, the breakfast precise, the morning newspaper folded crisply to avoid any unsightly creases. By 8:30, he was already climbing the steps to the late Mr. Caldwell's study, where the clocks still stood silent like mourners in a chapel. Madame Beatrice Caldwell met him at the door, surprised but polite. "Inspector Jameson is not with you today." "No, madam," Poirot replied gently. "Today I am not the guest of the law. I am the guest of curiosity. I hope to have a quiet moment with your late husband's beloved clocks." She looked puzzled. "Of course, but everything in that room has been inspected already." "By the eyes, madame, not by the little grey cells." She allowed him in, and Poirot ascended to the study. He closed the door behind him, sealing himself in with silence and still air. His eyes wandered over the collection once more. Each timepiece was different, some grand, some humble. He moved from one to another, tapping the casing here, pressing the backs there, until he paused at the porcelain carriage clock, the one with the faint smear of blood, barely noticeable. He lifted it gently. "You were close to him at the end, mon ami." "Too close." Carefully, Poirot turned it over. The screws on the base had been disturbed recently. He took out a small tool from his coat pocket and unscrewed the panel. Inside was not the usual movement, but a tight velvet pouch wedged precisely to avoid rattling. Poirot opened it. His eyes lit up, though his expression barely changed. Inside gleamed a delicate, centuries-old escapement. Tiny initials HD were etched in flowing script into the polished brass, next to a faint fleur-de-lis. "The missing mechanism," Poirot whispered. So the thief was not the master, but the protector. He carefully replaced the pouch, screwed the panel back into place, and gently restored the clock to its original position. Downstairs he found Mrs. Caldwell setting tea in the parlour. "Madame," he said smoothly, "I must ask you, why did your husband not return the mechanism to Mr. Markham, even if he claimed it was damaged?" She looked up, startled. He was afraid. After the argument, Edgar said Markham might accuse him of theft, even ruin him. He'd built a reputation over 40 years. I think he intended to return it quietly once things had cooled. Yet he hid it. Somewhere safe? She nodded. But I don't know where. No, madam, Poirot said softly. I believe you do. You simply do not realize that you do. She stared at him. I'm not sure I understand. Poirot gave a gentle smile. The unconscious mind, madame, it often observes what the conscious mind overlooks. Let us see where that takes us. Later that afternoon, Poirot returned with Inspector Jameson, and together they paid a second visit to Harlan Bishop, the apprentice. Harlan looked up from his bench, visibly nervous now. We've had a development, Jameson said, folding his arms. The missing mechanism from the Dehaan clock has been found. Harlan blinked. Where? Poirot stepped forward. Inside the porcelain carriage clock in Mr. Caldwell's study, quite carefully concealed. The boy's mouth opened slightly. Then, he did have it? Poirot studied him closely. Indeed? Tell me, Harlan, were you ever asked to repair or alter that specific clock? No, sir, I've never touched it. Mr. Caldwell was protective of certain pieces. That was one of them. Did you ever notice him working on it? Harlan hesitated. Once, maybe 2 weeks ago, he was polishing the casing late one night. Said something about ensuring it was ready. But I thought he meant for a client. Poirot nodded. You are fond of him, are you not? Yes, Harlan said almost defiantly. He was hard on me, but he was fair. He taught me everything. Poirot exchanged a glance with Jameson. And yet he left you something very valuable in his will. Property, money, that speaks of more than professional regard. Harlan flushed. I didn't know about the will, I swear it. I believe you, Poirot said. But someone else may have found out. Jameson cleared his throat. If we're suggesting someone knew about the inheritance, we'll need to consider motive. Beatrice Caldwell is the wife. If Harlan benefits more than her... Ah, no, Poirot said gently. You make the mistake, mon ami. Madame Caldwell's motive is sentiment, not finance. She had no knowledge of the mechanism, no knowledge of the will, and yet she came to me because she knew her husband did not kill himself. Jameson frowned. But we still don't know who placed the gun in Caldwell's hand. Precisely, Poirot said. We must now study the movements of all those involved on the night of his death. Who was present? Who had access? Who could enter that room unnoticed? He looked at Harlan. Did anyone else visit the house that day? The apprentice thought for a moment. Yes, Mr. Markham came round in the afternoon. He was told Mr. Caldwell wasn't available, and he left, but he seemed furious. Did he leave through the front? Poirot asked. Yes, I watched from the workshop window. Poirot turned to Jameson. We must check something. If Mr. Markham indeed left by the front, could he have returned later, through the rear garden, perhaps? Jameson rubbed his chin. Possible. There's a gate back there, isn't there? Poirot smiled faintly. Every house has 2 entrances, and a man obsessed with time might forget that others are obsessed with what time can be worth. As they left, Poirot stood for a long moment outside Caldwell's house, looking up at the windows. Someone came back after the quarrel, he said quietly. Someone entered silently, removed the mechanism, was seen or disturbed, and in that moment panic, perhaps, murder made to look like suicide, but it was not tidy, it was emotional. The scratches on the window, the blood on the clock, all tell a story. Jameson exhaled slowly. So what now? Now, mon ami, Poirot said, we return to the scene of the crime, not for what it contains, but for what it lacks. Chapter 4. The Second Hand. The late autumn wind rustled the ivy on the facade of number 4, Davenheim Mews, as Hercule Poirot returned for a final solitary inspection. Inspector Jameson had gone to arrange interviews with Markham and Beatrice Caldwell, but Poirot preferred to work alone now, just him and the ghosts of time. The house was quiet, the study untouched since his last visit. Poirot stepped inside, closed the door softly behind him, and allowed his eyes to scan the room not for objects, but for discrepancies. He moved first to the desk. The typewriter still bore the note supposedly left by Caldwell. "I can no longer endure it." Poirot removed the paper and examined it beneath the light. No signature, no distinctive turn of phrase, and it is typewritten, completely out of character for a man who prized handwriting as an art. Poirot pulled open the drawers one by one. Neatly stacked correspondence, catalogues of timepieces, an envelope labelled Will, updated, but nothing surprising. Then he returned to the clocks. He had already found the Dehan mechanism hidden inside the porcelain carriage clock. But what had drawn his attention now was not what was present, but what was missing. Caldwell, Poirot recalled, had one signature piece in all his interviews with horological publications, a handcrafted brass and glass skeleton clock suspended on a marble base. It had featured in photographs. It was often mentioned in articles as his magnum opus. And yet, here in his own study, it was gone. Poirot knelt beside the empty space on the bottom shelf of the wall case. A clear circle of dust outlined where the base once sat. "Ah," he murmured. "What happened to you, mon cher temps perdu?" Back in the parlour, he questioned Mrs. Caldwell once more. "Madame, forgive the intrusion. Your late husband's skeleton clock, the one he was famed for, where is it?" She blinked. "It should be in the study. It always sat on the shelf by the south wall." Poirot nodded. "It is not there now." Her brow furrowed. "He would never part with it." "Precisely. Which means if it is gone, someone else took it." "When was the last time you saw it?" "The day before Edgar died. He was adjusting the pendulum." "And afterward?" "I didn't go into the study again until the police came." Poirot stood still for a moment. "Madame, was there a key to the back garden?" "Yes, on a hook in the kitchen. Why?" "It was there after the death." "I didn't look. I wasn't thinking clearly." Poirot bowed his head. "You have been most helpful." Poirot joined Inspector Jameson at Scotland Yard later that afternoon. Markham had been brought in for questioning, but remained coolly unshaken. "He still insists he never returned to the Caldwell house after the quarrel," Jameson said, frustrated. "Claims he was reading Leviathan in bed." "Then let us consider what we know," Poirot said. First, Caldwell had recently updated his will to include his apprentice, Harlan Bishop. Second, he quarrelled with Markham over a valuable clock component, the Dehan escapement. Third, he hid that mechanism in a clock in his own study. Why? Fear, Jameson guessed. No, it was not fear alone, it was pride. Caldwell was a man of order. He would not sell a piece and claim innocence. He hid the mechanism to protect it from someone he no longer trusted, and to later return it safely, perhaps when the matter could be resolved. But someone else discovered the secret. "You think the motive was the Dehan escapement?" Poirot raised a finger. "It was part of the motive. But no one kills for just a cog in a clock. Let us suppose Caldwell discovered the theft of his skeleton clock, the one missing from his study. Let us suppose he confronted the thief. You think he was killed over it? Oui, a confrontation, a scuffle, perhaps even blackmail, and the murderer, in haste, arranged the scene to look like suicide. A typewritten note, impersonal, vague, a revolver in the hand, a room locked, perhaps too perfectly." Jameson frowned. "Still no signs of forced entry." "Number but I believe we are dealing with someone who knew the house. Perhaps not intimately, but enough. At that moment, a constable entered. "Sir, we've finished the trace on the missing skeleton clock." Poirot turned at once. "You have?" "Yes, sir. It was sold this morning, quietly, to an antique reseller in Camden. The seller gave a false name, but the description, it matches Harlan Bishop." Jameson's face darkened. "The boy! I knew it!" Poirot raised his hand. "Let us not leap. Let us visit the boy again, with delicacy." Back at Davenheim Mews, Harlan Bishop was nowhere to be found. His room was empty and his bed unmade. A neighbour reported seeing him leave earlier that day carrying a valise. Poirot stood in the doorway of the small upstairs room, taking in the view. The window overlooked the rear garden gate, the one never checked the night of Caldwell's death. He watched the house, Poirot said softly. He knew the rhythms, the quiet. He waited until Beatrice slept. Perhaps Caldwell discovered the theft, confronted him, and then he pointed to the bedpost. A faint smear of brass polish. On the floor, an abandoned polishing cloth. He cleaned the skeleton clock, then sold it. But he knew we were circling, so he ran. Jameson turned. "We'll put out a warrant." Poirot, however, remained by the window. "Do so, yes, but remember, Harlan may not be the only one with secrets. Caldwell's death is not merely about timepieces and wills, mon ami. It is about betrayal." That evening, Poirot returned home to Whitehaven Mansions. As he stepped inside, Miss Lemon handed him a telegram. "Took train to Bath. Need time to think. Don't know who to trust. H." Poirot turned the paper over, then folded it neatly. "So," he whispered, "the apprentice flee, but not out of guilt. Out of fear." He sat by the fire, lost in thought. One clock stolen, one hidden, one man dead, two suspects, but only one murderer. And I think now, I hear the ticking heart of the truth. Chapter 5. A matter of motive. The rain had begun to fall steadily over London by the time Hercule Poirot arrived once again at Scotland Yard. Inside, the corridors hummed with quiet activity, but Poirot's presence caused more than one constable to pause and nod respectfully. There was something about the small Belgian, his quiet precision, his self-assured calm, that seemed to cast a hush over every room he entered. Inspector Jameson met him just outside the interview room. "No sign of Harlan Bishop yet," he reported, voice clipped. "We've sent word to Bath, as per the telegram, but nothing so far." Poirot nodded. "He will return, or better yet, he will lead us where we need to go. But tell me, Inspector, you have brought in Madame Caldwell again?" "Yes. She's waiting inside, just as you asked." Poirot entered the room where Beatrice Caldwell sat in a dark blue coat, her gloves folded neatly in her lap. She looked older than she had only days ago. The shadows beneath her eyes deepened, her posture just slightly slouched. "Madame," Poirot said gently, "I must speak with you again. This time not of clocks, but of marriage." Beatrice blinked. What do you mean?" "Forgive me for being direct, but was your marriage to Mr. Caldwell a happy one?" She hesitated. "Edgar was particular, very particular. He could be cold, detached. His work came first, but I respected him." "Respected?" Poirot tilted his head. "Not loved?" Beatrice's lip trembled. "There was love once, but over the years it faded into routine. He withdrew. I tried to support him." Poirot sat opposite her, his gaze unwavering. "Did he ever speak to you of Harlan Bishop? Did he express concerns about the boy?" She shook her head slowly. "He never said a word." "And yet," Poirot said softly, "he changed his will." "He left the house to the apprentice, not to you. Surely that must have shocked you." "I didn't know until you told me," she said faintly. And yes, it did hurt. But perhaps he thought Harlan would carry on the work. Perhaps he thought I wouldn't care. Poirot leaned forward, lowering his voice. "And did you care, madame?" Beatrice's gaze met his. "I devoted 30 years to a man who never once said thank you, and now, even in death, he overlooked me." Poirot stood slowly. "Merci, madame. That is all, for now." As he left the room, Jameson joined him in the hallway. "She's brittle," Jameson said, "but I still don't see her shooting her husband." "Nor do I, Inspector, but she provides us with something else. Context. A man does not change his will in favor of a near stranger unless he has either grown disillusioned with those closest to him, or he sees promise in someone others dismiss." Poirot led Jameson into the evidence room. The revolver used in Caldwell's death lay sealed in a glass case, along with the original typed suicide note. "There is something troubling me," Poirot said. "This gun, Caldwell registered it. It was kept in his drawer, but no fingerprints were found. The note, typed by a machine in his study, also no fingerprints. Now, Inspector, let me ask, who in that household had access to gloves and might know where such a gun was kept?" Jameson's eyes narrowed. "Harlan." Poirot raised a finger. "But also Beatrice Caldwell." Jameson stiffened. "You think she?" "I think she resented her husband. I think she may have discovered the change in the will, perhaps not directly, but a letter left out, a conversation overheard. Motive, certainly, but opportunity, that is harder to prove." Jameson crossed his arms. "We've got a body, a forged note, a missing timepiece, a stolen mechanism, and a vanished apprentice. Where does that leave us?" Poirot walked to the window, looking out at the grey sky. "It leaves us with the truth still ticking, quietly, beneath the surface." He turned abruptly. "We must speak to Julian Markham again." That evening, Poirot and Jameson returned to Kronos and Curios. Markham stood behind the counter, polishing a pocket watch with excessive care. "Back so soon?" he asked. "Have you come to accuse me again?" "No, monsieur," Poirot said smoothly. "Only to ask, tell me, did you ever offer to purchase the skeleton clock from Mr. Caldwell?" Markham looked startled, then laughed. "That monstrosity? Hideous thing? No, I had no interest in it." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And yet, I have it on good authority that a certain collector, Mr. George Wellstone, received an anonymous call offering the piece for sale the very day after Caldwell's death. He declined, of course, but he recognized the description." Markham's composure faltered. "You were desperate to replace the Dehan mechanism," Poirot continued. "And perhaps you thought the skeleton clock was valuable enough to make up the loss, but Caldwell refused to sell. You argued, you threatened, and then someone got to it before you could." Markham scowled. "So now you're saying I didn't kill him?" "I am saying you had a motive, but lacked the finesse. The scene was too elegant, too composed, too silent. No, monsieur, you are not our killer. You are merely a desperate man with a bruised ego." Poirot turned and walked out without another word, Jameson trailing behind. Outside, the rain had stopped. A chill crept through the air. "Then who?" Jameson asked. Poirot paused at the corner, under the glow of a flickering street lamp. "Let us recap," he said. "Caldwell changes his will, a valuable piece is stolen, a murder is committed but disguised as suicide, elegantly, carefully. The clocks are silent, but one bears a stain of blood. The skeleton clock is taken, cleaned and sold, and the only person who might tie it all together flees to Bath." Jameson raised an eyebrow. "Harlan?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Number. He runs because he knows the truth, because he saw something, heard something, and fears he'll be blamed." Jameson frowned. "So who's the killer?" Poirot looked up at the clock tower across the street. The one who understands time best, Inspector. The one who knows exactly how to delay, deceive, and strike when the hour is right. He turned to Jameson. Call everyone to the Caldwell house tomorrow morning. I shall gather them all in the study. It is time. Chapter 6. The Gathering. The study at number 4, Davenheim Mews, had been restored to its usual order, though the air still held the faint scent of polish and something subtler. Finality. The clocks lining the walls remained motionless, as if waiting for permission to tick once more. Hercule Poirot stood in the centre of the room precisely at 10 o'clock, his hands folded neatly before him. He had summoned them all, and one by one they entered, each shadowed by something unresolved. Beatrice Caldwell was the first to arrive, her expression unreadable, her black gloves clutched tightly. Julian Markham entered next, his coat damp from the morning rain, and his scowl firmly in place. Last came Harlan Bishop, apprehensive, thin-faced, shoulders hunched, escorted quietly by Inspector Jameson after being located in a boarding house in Bath just that morning. Poirot greeted each with a courteous nod and gestured toward the 3 chairs he had arranged before the desk. "Please," he said, "be seated." Jameson stood near the door, arms crossed, silent. Poirot turned to face the group. "We are here, Messieurs et Madame, to bring the truth into the light. One of you is responsible for the death of Edgar Caldwell, a man who lived by the ticking of 1,000 clocks, and was killed because of what he valued." Beatrice Caldwell opened her mouth, but Poirot raised a hand. "I ask only that you listen." He began to pace slowly. At first, it seemed a simple tragedy, a suicide, a note, a revolver, a room locked from the inside, but nothing about Edgar Caldwell's life, or death, was simple. He paused before the mantelpiece. The typewritten note was the first crack. Caldwell did not use machines to express himself. He wrote with a fountain pen in precise copperplate. A typed message from such a man? No. And then there was the missing chronometer, his prized De Haan escapement. Hidden, not lost. He turned to Harlan. "You did not steal it, did you?" Harlan swallowed. "No, sir. I found it hidden inside the porcelain carriage clock after he died. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid it would make me look guilty. So I cleaned the skeleton clock, the one I knew was valuable, and sold it to raise money to get away. I was scared." "Ah," Poirot said gently. "Fear can make fools of the innocent, but also of the guilty." He faced Beatrice now. "Madame, your husband changed his will. You were not told. You felt betrayed. You had motive, but you did not have the heart. You came to me after all." "Why?" Her voice cracked. "Because I knew he would never have taken his own life." Poirot nodded slowly. "And so we come to the scene itself, a study locked from within, a man shot with his own revolver. A typewritten note left in the carriage, and yet no fingerprints, no blood on the gun. The angle of the wound, awkward, inconsistent with suicide." He looked to Markham. "You, Monsieur Markham, had quarrelled with the victim. You accused him of theft. You had a motive and opportunity. Your visit that afternoon placed you close enough to observe. But not, I think, to kill. You are angry, but not clever. No, this murder was elegant. Cold, precise." Markham scoffed. "Then who?" Poirot stepped toward the centre of the room. It had to be someone with access, someone who could move silently through the house, someone who understood the clocks, who could remove a mechanism cleanly, leave no mess, someone who knew the habits of Edgar Caldwell intimately. Poirot turned toward the 3rd chair and pointed. "The murderer is Harlan Bishop." A sharp intake of breath swept the room. Harlan stood up abruptly. "No, I didn't." Poirot raised a hand. You didn't intend to, that much I believe. But circumstances, they changed. He gestured to the room. You lived here, you watched. You knew the study was locked by a secondary catch only accessible from the inside, and you had the tools to manipulate it. You knew where the revolver was kept, and more than that, you knew Caldwell's routine. He worked late, he polished his clocks, he reviewed the books. Poirot's voice sharpened. You thought you were going to be dismissed. You discovered the will had been changed in your favor, and perhaps you said something. Or perhaps Caldwell discovered the theft of the skeleton clock, and he threatened to expose you. Harlan's lips moved silently, but no words emerged. Then, Poirot continued, in the heat of the moment, a struggle. The gun retrieved, a shot fired. You panicked. You cleaned the prints, typed a vague note, used the knowledge of the latch to lock the door, and placed the mechanism inside the porcelain clock because you couldn't bear to part with it. You respected it even as you killed for it. Beatrice stood. He trusted you. Harlan's voice was barely a whisper. He told me he was leaving me the house. I thought he was lying, just trying to keep me loyal. I only took the skeleton clock because I wanted something that would prove I mattered. I never meant to kill him. He confronted me about the missing piece. He reached for the drawer. I thought he was going to hit me. Poirot's gaze did not soften. You took a life, monsieur, out of fear, out of ambition. Jameson stepped forward and placed a firm hand on the young man's shoulder. That's enough. You'll tell the rest at the station. As Harlan was led away, Poirot remained still. Beatrice sat heavily into her chair. All this time, I thought Edgar didn't trust me, but he trusted him. Poirot bowed his head. Madame, your husband was a man of clocks. He believed time never lied. But men often do. He walked to the window and looked out over the mews. The clock stopped the moment he died, but now they may tick again. Chapter 7. The clock strikes truth. The events of the previous day lingered like a fog in Poirot's mind as he sat quietly at his flat in Whitehaven Mansions. The air smelled faintly of lavender polish and bergamot tea, a comforting scent that wrapped around him like an old wool coat. Outside, the sky was clear for the first time in days, and yet something about the case still weighed on him. It was not dissatisfaction with the resolution. Harlan Bishop had confessed. He had provided a full statement, supported by evidence: the stolen skeleton clock, the missing mechanism, the revolver, wiped clean. Inspector Jameson was satisfied. Scotland Yard was, as usual, a step behind, but grateful for Poirot's tidy ribbon around the package. And yet, Poirot's little grey cells murmured still. Something was wrong. He sat motionless for nearly an hour before rising with a sudden decision. He took up his walking stick, donned his overcoat, and departed once more for Davenheim Mews. Beatrice Caldwell answered the door herself this time. Her morning attire remained unchanged, but her manner was different. Hollow, almost brittle. I didn't expect you, she said. Forgive me, madame, Poirot replied gently. There is one more matter I must examine. She stepped aside without question. He entered the study. Everything was where it had been. The clocks, though, had been wound. They ticked again, soft and precise, each to its own rhythm. It gave the room an oddly comforting hum, like a nest of bees beneath a floorboard. Poirot walked straight to the porcelain carriage clock and examined it again, unscrewing the back panel. The Dehan escapement still rested inside the velvet pouch. He did not touch it. Instead, he looked at the clock's face. Then he looked at the others in the room, and he smiled. "Madame Caldwell," he called gently, "may I ask who wound these clocks?" She appeared at the doorway, hands folded. "I did, this morning. Edgar wouldn't have wanted them to sit idle. It felt disrespectful." "You did very well," Poirot said kindly. "And yet, this one," he pointed to a tall grandfather clock, "ticks too fast. And that one," he nodded at the wall-mounted regulator, "drifts slow. But you wound them all at the same time?" "Yes," she said, surprised. Poirot tapped his finger on the porcelain clock's casing. "Except this one, it ticks perfectly, exactly as it did the day Caldwell died." She frowned. "I didn't wind that one. It was already ticking." "Indeed," Poirot said, "and that, madame, is the final truth." He turned to face her fully. "You said you never entered this room after your husband died, until the police arrived, but that is not true. You entered this room before they arrived, after you heard the shot." Her face went pale. "Number that's not—" "The clocks, madame, they do not lie. This one still ticked, undisturbed, for days, but it had to have been rewound. By someone. The police never did. Harlan Bishop didn't have access after the body was discovered." Poirot stepped closer. "And it was ticking when you wound the others, because you wound it the night of the murder, before the police came, before anyone else arrived, which means you were in this room. You moved the mechanism, you hid it, and you staged the suicide scene before the constable was called." Beatrice's mouth opened slightly. Her voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "I thought you believed Harlan did it." Poirot's expression was sympathetic, but firm. "I allowed you to believe that, because I needed to see what you would do once you were no longer under suspicion." She sat down slowly in her husband's armchair. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," she said, her voice distant now. "I only meant to scare him. I found out about the will. I read it by accident. I couldn't believe he'd given everything to that boy after all our years together." Poirot stood silently. "I confronted Edgar that night. He didn't deny it. He said Harlan was more like a son to him than I had ever been a wife, that he'd finally found someone who understood him." She shook her head slowly. "I slapped him. He reached for his gun, not to threaten me, just out of instinct, but I was faster. It went off. He fell." Poirot closed his eyes for a moment. "I panicked," she continued. "I knew no one would believe it was an accident. So I typed the note. I wiped the gun. I locked the door from the inside, then used the old keyhole trick from his locksmithing days to exit and relock it." She looked up at Poirot, her eyes dry but empty. "I came back in when the constable arrived, pretended to be shocked. Let Harlan take the blame." Poirot sighed. "You knew he'd fled. You hoped he would stay gone." She nodded slowly. "It was easier that way." Jameson arrived minutes later, summoned by Poirot's discreet message earlier that morning. Beatrice Caldwell rose quietly and offered no resistance. As she was led out, she paused beside Poirot. "Will you tell Harlan?" she asked. Poirot's voice was soft. "He will know, in time. The truth always reaches those who deserve it." That evening, back in Whitehaven Mansions, Poirot sat in his armchair, a single candle flickering beside him. He wrote briefly in his case journal, paused, then looked up at the mantel clock ticking precisely above the hearth. "It is a curious thing," he murmured. "In a house full of clocks, the one thing no one can control is time itself." He folded the journal closed and let silence return. Chapter 8. The Final Hour. 1 week had passed since the truth was unveiled at Davenheim Mews. Beatrice Caldwell had confessed to the killing of her husband Edgar in a moment of rage and despair. Though the courts would decide her fate, Hercule Poirot believed the real punishment had already begun, the slow ticking torment of regret, louder than any clock. But not all stories end with a gavel. Some require a gentler epilogue. It was late afternoon, and the sun cast long shadows through the windows of Whitehaven mansions. Poirot was seated at his usual spot, polishing a small brass timepiece that had been sent to him anonymously 2 days earlier. It was familiar, the missing skeleton clock, now returned. Miss Lemon entered, holding an envelope. "A visitor's letter, Monsieur Poirot," she said. "From Bath." Poirot opened it carefully. Inside was a folded sheet of inexpensive writing paper, the ink neat, but clearly written with effort. "Dear Monsieur Poirot, I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay you." I ran because I was scared of being accused of being nothing again. I loved Mr. Caldwell like a father, even if he didn't say it back. I think now he was trying to protect me, not just with the will, but with everything. I found work here. A clockmaker took me on after I showed him some of the repairs I did. It's not much, but it's a start. I won't let it all be wasted. Thank you for seeing who I was when I couldn't even see it myself. Yours, respectfully, Harlan Bishop Poirot read the letter twice, then folded it and placed it beside the clock. "Bravo," he murmured. "It is not easy to begin again, but perhaps for him the hour is not too late." There was a knock at the door. Inspector Jameson entered, brushing off his coat. "I thought I'd find you exactly like this," he said with a smirk. Poirot gestured for tea, and Miss Lemon returned with the tray. "Tell me, mon ami," Poirot said, "how does the Yard view our little matter now that it has, as they say, ticked to its conclusion?" Jameson sighed. "We've closed the case. No trial. Mrs. Caldwell passed a written confession and intends to plead guilty. The Crown will likely accept manslaughter with diminished capacity. She's agreed not to contest the will. Harlan's inheritance remains intact." Poirot nodded. "A wise decision. Justice must sometimes take account of the heart, not merely the law." Jameson glanced at the small, brass skeleton clock, now gleaming on Poirot's sideboard. "I still find it hard to believe she killed him. She seemed so composed." Poirot lifted his cup. "Ah, but composition is not peace, Inspector. The woman bore 30 years of silence, of being outshone by a man who valued brass and springs over human warmth. When she discovered she would lose even his memory to an apprentice, it proved too much." He paused. "Murder is rarely born in darkness, my friend. It is born in quiet, in neglect, in moments stretched like wires." Snap Jameson shook his head. "And yet, not cold-blooded." "No," Poirot agreed, "but calculated once done. The note, the room, the clocks. She could have confessed, but she feared the shame more than the guilt." Jameson sipped his tea. "And what of Markham?" Poirot allowed himself a small smile. "He will recover from the embarrassment, but I do not expect to see him boasting in the horological circles any time soon. His ego has been wound a bit too tightly." They both chuckled quietly. Outside, the chimes of St. Dunstan's echoed through the street. 5 o'clock. Poirot stood and adjusted the hands on the skeleton clock. "It is said, Inspector, that time heals all wounds, but I do not agree. Time conceals, it distracts. But healing? Number, that takes understanding." Jameson stood too, pulling on his gloves. "Well, you've certainly helped that happen here." As he made his way to the door, he paused. "Will you keep the clock?" Poirot gave a small nod. "Mais oui, a reminder. Not of the crime, but of the truth beneath it." Jameson nodded. "Till the next one, then." Poirot bowed his head slightly. "Always." When the door closed and silence returned, Poirot placed the clock back on the shelf, now ticking in perfect harmony with the rest of his modest collection. A quiet satisfaction filled the room. Another case closed, another truth revealed. and another moment ticked forward.